Hello, everybody. Thank you, Ben. Thank you all for having me again. Second time this year. I always like to say that this is my favorite Rare Fruit Club to talk to, because it's 5 minutes from my job. I am a member of this club, by the way, and have been for a pretty long time. So thanks a lot, Ben. Thank you for all that you do and all the hard work that you put towards making all this possible. Okay, so tonight, well, you all are used to me talking about mangoes, of course, and I do enjoy talking about mangoes, but I wanted to talk about a different topic that's near and dear to my heart, a fruit that is not quite as common as the mango is here in South Florida, but is certainly worthy of seeing a lot more planting than it has, or they have, because I am talking about two different species here, but tonight I'm talking about Mamey and green Sapote. So, for one thing, how many people here grow Mamey or green Sapote? Oh, that's a decent number, actually more than I was expecting. How many people here have tried either one of these fruits? Okay, quite a few. All right, impressive. I'm glad to see that. Okay, well, just a little bit about myself in case you've not heard of our little project over here. My name is Alex Salazar. I own Tropical Acres Farms here in West Palm Beach. Basically 5 minutes east up the road here, just south of Southern. Pretty close. I grew up here in South Florida. I started farming, I guess, just right after I finished college, and I've been doing it ever since. We're known for mangoes. We grow over 300 varieties of mangoes at our farm over there, but we do grow other stuff. Including a nice collection of avocados, sapodillas, and a growing collection of Mamey and green Sapotes, of which we grow at least 17 varieties at this point. So it's a pretty hefty collection, and it's going to be increasing in the not too distant future. And we've planted some new varieties pretty recently. So these are some shots of the farm. And we are very, very blessed to be in a very good location for growing not just mangoes, although that is our primary focus, but other tropical fruits as well because of our proximity to the ocean and because our soil actually has a slightly acidic pH rather than the alkaline pH found in much of, in other parts of South Florida. So we operate a functioning fruit farm that produces and sells fruit, and we also have a nursery that we sell grafted trees from and ship all over the country. We made about 10,000 trees this year. Okay, so Mamey Sapote will be the first fruit discussed on this presentation. Because of the breadth of the subject, I did not, do every single topic in regards to taking care of a Mamey tree. I didn't really go over pests and some other things like that. But at the end of this presentation, I will open up the floor to questions of any kind, anything that I didn't cover in this presentation. If you want to ask me about other fruits, mangoes, whatever, you're more than welcome to as well, but we'll get to that at the end. Okay, so Mamey Sapote. Its botanical name, of course, is Potaria sapota. It is a member of the Potaria family of flowering trees, which is a very, very large family of trees. And it is related to some of the other tropical fruits that you might be familiar with, such as canistel, kaimito, abu, and of course the green Sapote that will be discussed in this presentation. It probably originated in modern southern Mexico. It is from Central America originally, or modern Mexico and Central America. It's hard to pinpoint exactly where Mamey's point of origin was, but it might have been the Yucatan. Later on it spread through into South America and the Caribbean. So today it is, of course, the national fruit of Cuba, essentially, and it is more popular in that country than any country in the world, including Mexico. So kind of interesting how that history went. But anyway, it's been around for thousands of years, and it was pretty well known to the Native Americans at the time. The Mayans used to make like a special beverage out of it, for example, and of course they did consume the fruit itself. So long before the Europeans arrived, Mamey was being cultivated in some respects in Central America. It really is mostly common in the dry lowlands, warm areas. It is very much a tropical fruit, so it does not tolerate really cold weather, especially freezing weather. So it doesn't like really wet areas either, though, so something to keep in mind about it. The tree itself is can be a pretty aggressive tree. They're classified as evergreens, which should mean that they hold onto their leaves all year long. They're really kind of semi-deciduous in a lot of respects because they'll usually shed a lot of them, not usually, a lot of Mamey trees will shed their leaves in the spring and then they'll leaf out again shortly afterwards. But some of them hold onto their leaves throughout the entire year, so it's something that varies by the cultivar and tree by tree. It produces pretty large leaves. And the internodal spacing, like the spacing between the leaves on a Mamey tree, can vary quite a bit by the cultivar. So some of them, they're very wide, especially on the more larger varieties, and then on the more compact ones, the leaves are closer together, unsurprisingly. So it's like the same thing with a lot of other fruit species, such as mango. The dwarf trees will have shorter internodes. So most Mameys are pretty vigorous growers. They can get to pretty large sizes. In fact, down in Central America, they can get over 100 feet tall. Now that doesn't really happen here in Florida thanks to hurricanes and freezes and such threats, but they can get easily over 50 feet tall over a very long period of time here. Now, don't discourage yourself from planting a Mamey for that reason, because there are varieties of Mameys that are relatively compact and can be kept reasonably small, and even in small yards, with just a little bit of pruning and proper care. But the older trees can get pretty large. And here's an example of one. We have quite a few Mamey trees in West Palm Beach, and part of that's because we have a very large Cuban diaspora population here in the West Palm Beach area, particularly in southern West Palm Beach. So Mamey trees aren't that uncommon here. They're not as common as mangoes and even avocados, but you'll see them if you look around for them. And this is just one that's growing in one of the yards adjacent to our farm. And it's pretty tall, as you can see. It's way above the power lines there. Now, I did mention that there are compact Mameys that can be kept pretty small. Here's an example of one growing between two mango trees. And that tree there at this point is approaching 10 years of age. So not too bad, right? Now they won't all stay that size, and they won't all be able to be kept at that size. But it just shows what you can do with good choices and planning. All right, so I'll talk about the fruit. Botanically speaking, it's a berry, but that's just a botanical term, of course, for how the inflorescence forms and how the flesh is formed on the embryo. But the flowers are borne on the bark, so it does not produce panicles the way a mango or an avocado does. Along the branches, you will see little buds pop up, and then these turn into flowers, and I'll show you photographs in a moment of what that looks like. But the fruit itself is usually either round or oval. So some of them are kind of oblong, some of them are more like a spherical shape, if you will. And they have kind of a brown, thick, some will call it scurfy or sandpaper-like skin. So they're all pretty much the same in that respect. As the fruit starts to mature, the skin color will start to turn to more of a grayish color. They have a smooth flesh, so the flesh in terms of texture is similar to that of an avocado. In terms of what it feels like, certainly not what it tastes like, but the color on a Mamey is usually pretty attractive. Either ranges from salmon to on the darker ones, like a real dark red. Apparently there's some Mameys out there that have yellowish flesh. I've heard of a few that have purple flesh. Not any varieties that are commonly available here, but some of them in Central America, particularly in Costa Rica. There's some interesting ones down there, but hopefully someday we'll be able to grow here. So the seasons of most Mamey trees is between March and October. So basically the warmer months of the year is when most Mamey varieties have their fruiting season. Now there are exceptions. There are a few varieties that fruit in the winter. But generally speaking, the Mamey season in Florida, in terms of the volume of fruit available, is at its peak between March and October, probably with most of the fruit being available in the summer months. So, something to keep in mind. You can stretch the Mamey season pretty far depending on what you plant. If you plant some of these later or really early ones, or even the winter ones, you can almost have fruit almost all year. So it's not as short of a season as something like mango, or even like lychee, which is measured in almost weeks. Mamey season is fairly long. But with an individual tree, you can expect the crop to usually span 2 months at most, in terms of how long from the time you pick the first ripe fruit or ready fruit to the last one. But that's a fairly long season too for a single tree. Anyway, so this is what the flowers look like when they start. Just these little buds start forming on the bark. Typically, it's going to be on wood that's less than a few years old. You won't see too much flowering activity on like the trunk, for instance, but you won't see it on real young wood either. So like when they've pushed out a shoot within the last month or something, it's unlikely that you're going to see any flower buds on that stem. But this is what the flowers look like. They're fairly small, maybe the size of your fingernail or so, and they kind of open up gradually. They don't just open up all at once. They're pollinated by pretty much anything that'll visit them. Flies, ants do a lot of the pollinating. Honeybees actually like Mamey flowers quite a bit, which is great because they don't like mango flowers so much. But anyway, they produce way more flowers than they actually end up setting fruit on or holding fruit on, so that's normal. And with Mameys, they will have developing fruit and flowers on the tree at the same time. And there's a reason for that. Mameys take a very, very long time from the point of time that they've set that fruit until that fruit is actually mature and ready to either fall off the tree or pick or whatever. And in that amount of time, the tree already starts its next reproductive cycle. So they're kind of odd trees in that respect. That's not something that we always see on all fruit trees. So what does Mamey taste like? Well, if I asked any of you that question, you might have a hard time describing what a Mamey tastes like, and frankly, I do too. However, the most common references you'll see when people attempt to describe its flavor are that it's got like a pumpkin or sweet potato pie type flavor component to it. Now, they don't taste precisely like that, and I often say that there's, in a lot of Mameys, a little bit of an almond component as well, and there's other flavors going on too. I'm not great at describing flavors of fruits, but it is one of my favorite fruits to eat. It's a very rich, sweet, pretty robust flavor, and I just love Mamey. I rank it right up there with some of my favorite fruits. And I rank it ahead of a lot of what I would say more well-known, or in some cases more popular fruits. But despite the fact that you can eat a Mamey, just cut it open and eat it with a spoon, a lot of people like to use Mamey to make like aftermarket products, or they make smoothies with them. Ice creams are common. There's a brand of ice cream that's available at a lot of supermarkets called Valentini that makes a Mamey ice cream that's pretty good. But I like to make ice cream with some of my Mamey fruit as well. And so a lot of times the pulp gets frozen for that purpose. So this is a Mamey pie. Now, I made a couple of these for this talk, so there's a few of them at the tasting table today. It's very similar to pumpkin pie, so if you're not a fan of pumpkin pie, you probably won't be a fan of this. But
it's just one of the many uses for Mamey, and there's quite a few of them. So, all right, so harvesting Mamey is a little tricky because you have to first understand what the maturity windows of the variety you're growing happens to be, like when you expect the fruit on a Mamey to be physiologically ready to pick. Because if you pick them too early, they don't ripen right, just like lots of other fruits. And unfortunately, they're not so useful when they aren't mature. So it's not like a green mango or something where you can turn it into a salad or a chutney or something like that, or a papaya. Green Mamey are not very good to eat, so pretty astringent and not so pleasant. So you want to get them when they're mature. So the best method for determining if a Mamey is mature is to scratch the fruit physically, either with your fingernail or a tool or a key or something like that. A fruit that scratches green shouldn't be picked, but a fruit that scratches orange or red is usually physiologically mature. It can be picked and ripened off the tree. It is not a good idea to let Mamey ripen on the tree, because usually by that point they're very prone to splitting open and getting taken by animals and stuff. So your best bet if you're growing Mamey and you want to harvest them properly is to scratch individual fruits. Now, if a tree gets really large, that becomes kind of difficult. So, not to mention that it's challenging to harvest a Mamey because it's not hanging from a panicle. So if it gets really large, you have to get up in a ladder to physically pick each fruit a lot of the times. So anyway, it's a good reason to keep your Mamey trees at a manageable height, like ideally under 20 feet, and it's very doable even with the vigorous ones. And some of the less vigorous ones you can keep under 15. So if it looks like this, don't pick it. Now, one thing I will say is that sometimes you can scratch a Mamey on one part and it'll be red or orange, and then you scratch another part and it's still green. With certain varieties, this is okay. Like Pantene, you can scratch it on one part, and if it's pink or orange on any part, it usually ripens okay. But then there's Mameys that don't ripen so well if they scratch green on any part of them, like Magana, for example. And in that case, if you want to be extra sure, you just scratch the fruit in like multiple spots, at least 2 spots, and sometimes even 3, to make sure that the fruit's going to ripen properly. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about Mamey's history here in our state of Florida, because Mamey hasn't been here in Florida forever. It's only been here actually a relatively recent amount of time, less than 140 years or so, probably more like 130. But it was first introduced in the late 19th century by seeds that were brought from Cuba. Okay, and all these early specimens would have been grown from seed. They weren't brought here as grafted trees, which means they would have taken a while to fruit, because Mameys have a pretty long juvenile period they have to go through if they're grown from seed. So consequently, Mamey never became super popular here at the same time that citrus and mangoes and avocados were taking off. So like in the late 1800s, early 1900s, those fruits were becoming extremely popular as Florida's population grew and more people wanted to grow fruit crops here. But Mamey, despite existing here, by the start of the 20th century, never became super popular. And I think a big reason why is they were growing these things from seed and they were taking forever to fruit from seed. And there weren't probably too many people that were good at grafting them back then. And so we had a lot more freezes and bad winters back then, and so you can imagine that some fruit collector is growing a Mamey tree or a nursery, and they're trying to make this thing popular, and every time it got big enough to actually fruit, it would get killed back in a freeze. They have around the same cold hardiness as a mango tree, which is to say, not very good, right? So they get damaged at freezing temperatures, and they get killed once you get south of 30 degrees pretty easily. So for those reasons, Mamey was kind of like a curiosity, I suppose, to early fruit enthusiasts here in Florida. So, but it stuck around. The first variety that actually became popular here was selected in Key West, and that's known as the Pantene. The original Pantene tree still stands in Key West at an old fire station. So that was the first Mamey that really stood out, because Mameys grown from seed they can have issues with uneven ripening, with actually having fiber, and they're not all great quality, but this was the first one that stood out. So because the Pantene was so good and productive and promising, it became the first Mamey that was propagated on any kind of scale here in South Florida. And so as the Cuban population in Florida began to increase in the middle part of the 20th century, the enthusiasm for growing Mamey all of a sudden began to expand. Whereas before, there weren't as many people who were familiar with this fruit, even if it was going to be popular if they liked it. Now you had all these people that were very familiar with it, that grew up with it and loved it, moving to Florida, living here and wanting to grow it. So after the 1960s, the increase in the population in the Cuban community resulted in people finally planting Mamey commercially in the southern Miami-Dade County area, what we call the Redland. And eventually, new varieties got selected, new varieties got introduced from other countries. So there was enough interest in Mamey by the later part of the 20th century that we began to get more than just one type available. The collections in Miami-Dade County, like TRAC, USDA, and Fairchild, began to accumulate different varieties of Mameys to evaluate and see how their performance was here in Florida and provide alternatives to just the Pantene. So, because of its geographic restrictions, being a tropical fruit, it was still pretty much limited to southern Florida, southeast Florida, southwest Florida, and never went much far beyond where you would find mango trees or something like that. So even though you find quite a bit of dooryard examples of Mameys around here or in Broward or Miami-Dade counties, they're not so common in the rest of the state. And they absolutely can be grown in other areas of Florida, but there's a misconception that they can't. So one thing about Mameys, they have their pluses and minuses, and I like to tell people that Mameys are trees that require some patience in an age where there's not so many patient people. So they're not as precocious as a lot of other fruit trees. And so, we plant a mango tree at our farm and we're getting fruit within 3 years or less. 2 to 3 years is typical when we plant a grafted mango tree. An avocado tree is usually fruiting within 3 years and shouldn't take too much more than that. And certainly there's other, fruit trees that we plant that fruit even quicker than that. Mameys, not so much, even as grafted trees. And most of you are familiar that grafted trees usually fruit sooner than seedling trees, at least with most species. And that's true with Mameys too. A seedling Mamey can take 10 plus years to fruit, but a grafted Mamey can take up to 5, even if it's a decent sized one. So they don't spit out fruit immediately, and because of the long time it takes for them to develop their fruit, that juvenile time is extended even more. From the time a Mamey fruit is set, it can take anywhere from 12 to 24 months for that fruit to reach maturity. So depending on the cultivar, really. Some varieties, fruit a little quicker, like Viejo can have a ready fruit in about a year, but quite a few Mameys will take at least 18 months. So quite a while, they can drop a lot of fruit once we get into the fall period. In fact, right now a lot of our Mamey trees are dropping some of their fruit. Now, this isn't too alarming because it's normal. They will carry a decent number to maturity, but for somebody that's trying to grow a Mamey tree in their yard and they're getting fruit for the first time, they'll be shocked to see all this fruit dropping off the tree come October, November. And it's actually a normal thing for these trees to do here. So, on the positive side though, Mameys being tropical, really do not need cold weather to flower and fruit. Thus, when they start fruiting, they usually fruit very consistently year after year. Unlike lychees, longans, mangoes even now, every winter we're waiting and hoping and praying for cold fronts to get all our mango trees to flower. Well, that's not a problem for the Mamey. The Mamey is from a climate that doesn't really see cold weather, so they just keep on trucking, if you will. Now, the downside is that if you get an event, a destructive event like a hurricane that damages the tree and takes away its fruiting branches, then you can be waiting quite a bit of time before the tree starts to fruit again, compared to like a mango or something. Another thing about them is they're not flood tolerant. They really don't like their feet wet, but they're not drought tolerant either. They will show drought stress, especially as young trees. So if you try to grow a Mamey tree, be aware of that. It's beneficial to supply it with irrigation. Like most fruit trees, pruning Mameys is important. It's important for managing the canopy and keeping it at a size that's reasonable and easier for you to harvest. It's important for long-term fruit production too. So you don't want vertical, lanky growing Mamey trees. You want them to be trained in such a way that they have more of a spreading habit. And that helps keep their height under control and makes the fruit more accessible to you. They are kind of nutritionally sensitive trees. And by that I mean if your soil is lacking in some elements, which is common down here, they're likely to show it. And getting young Mamey trees established can be challenging, and a lot of homeowners that try to grow them will plant one, and maybe initially it does okay, and then it starts to suffer some dieback problems, and they wonder what they did wrong, or if it's just that the tree just doesn't do well here or whatever. And a lot of the times it's because the tree didn't receive quite the level of nutrition that it needed to become established. When they get older, they don't have this issue as much as their root systems become more established. But you really want to be prepared to supply these trees with a balanced NPK fertilizer. You want to give them micronutrients too, especially when they're in those first few years of life, or first few years in the ground, I should say. Nutritional sprays are beneficial. They do absorb through their leaves, unlike avocados. And there's a really great nutritional guide for Mamey that's published by the University of Florida's IFAS program. And you can find it very quickly on Google, Mamey growing in the Florida home landscape. That has a great chart and guide to when you should be fertilizing your Mameys and other tree care and so forth. So I highly recommend that to folks that are interested in growing Mamey, or maybe they want to take better care of their Mamey trees and get them thriving more. I think it's really beneficial with Mameys to try to amend your soil with mulch, compost, organic material. That seems to help quite a bit. So when we plant a new Mamey tree, we always apply mulch to the tree, and we'll continue to mulch them indefinitely. We mulch even our older fruiting Mamey trees that have been fruiting for a while. Unlike our mango trees, which we're trying to deny too much nitrogen to, we want to actually provide some of that through the decomposition of our mulch and any organic matter we throw underneath them. That helps also keep soil moisture so that they're not experiencing drought stress as rapidly when we go through our dry season. We do, of course, irrigate our Mamey trees with micro sprinklers, but sometimes a sprinkler gets clogged or turned off or something, and then the mulch kind of helps keep it from drying out. Also helps prevent, competition from the weeds. You should probably plan to irrigate a Mamey a couple times a week. So that way, when we're in our real dry part of the year, it's not experiencing any drought stress. older established trees that have been there a long time don't really need irrigation, but it will help keep more fruit on the tree. So the more drought stress they're experiencing, the more likely they are to upsize their, developing fruit. So think about that. Even if you have a big old tree, you might not think that you need to water it, but there is benefit to watering an old Mamey tree. They will hold more fruit. So propagation, Mameys are pretty much always grafted here. They don't really air layer well or take from cuttings. Most of the time they're cleft or veneer grafted. We have been able to bud them, but I would say like the vast majority of Mameys in the nursery trade are probably cleft grafted. They are somewhat tricky to graft. They're not as bad as like Spanish lime or something like that, but they're certainly not as easy as mango or avocado, for instance. Most nurseries are happy with like an over 70% rate of take on Mamey grafts. That would be rather pathetic for mango. So, but anyway, the one thing about them is that because they grow kind of slow initially, it's one of the only trees I tell people that, and because of how not unprecocious they are, it's one of the few fruit trees that I tell people it's fine to go plant like a 15-gallon if you can find one or bigger. So I don't usually recommend that for like mango trees, for instance. But with a Mamey, because of the time involved in getting them to maturity enough that they can flower and fruit, there is some benefit to planting larger size specimens. The trouble is finding them in that size. So Mameys are not grafted nearly as much as some of the other more popular fruit trees are, and consequently there's only a few nurseries that make Mameys like on scale, and I'm talking about like 3 or 4 nurseries. So not a pretty large number, and they're busy making a lot of other fruit trees, so they'll go through stretches of time where Mameys maybe aren't getting grafted for a while, and you'll see that reflected in the nursery trade when you go to try to buy a tree. Sometimes there's periods of time, stretches of time where you can't find one, and then all of a sudden they're on the market again. So, and there's a bunch of them available, and that pattern kind of ebbs and flows, and that's just because they're not as well known and sought after, and a nursery has a hard time justifying making tons of them. Now, there are a couple of nurseries that make a decent number of them, and I'll talk about them in a bit. But right now I'm going to go over cultivars. So this is the different varieties of Mamey that you can find here in Florida. Now, the list of Mamey varieties goes way beyond what I've got in this presentation, okay? So, it's pretty amazing how many varieties exist in other places. But we've got a pretty strong number of them in Florida now at this point. And so I'm going to go over ones first that are grafted commonly in the Florida nursery trades that they would be accessible to you, the homeowner. And I'll talk maybe briefly about some varieties that aren't so common. But first one is Pantene. I already mentioned it. Pantene is still the most widely planted Mamey in Florida. In fact, if you go to supermarkets and you see Mamey on the shelves, a lot of times it's going to be Pantene that you're looking at. And it's still a perfectly good Mamey. I would say it's outclassed by some of the newer varieties, but I'm not turning down a Pantene. We have a Pantene tree. It fruits very well for us. So it's held up to the test of time in part because it is a strong producing tree. It does not get a very deep red color. It's more of a kind of an orangey color, I suppose. Some would say salmon. They're usually in season in the later part of summer. And I don't know, Pantene's probably like 70+% of the Mamey commercial acreage in Florida. And Pantene trees are usually not too hard to find in the nursery trade. The next one is Magana. Magana is, I believe, from El Salvador and is the second most common Mamey variety grown commercially here in Florida, and it is also very common in our nursery trade. So Magana trees aren't too hard to find either. It is maybe the largest Mamey that is commonly available in Florida as well. Now this is one that that's a picture of one that I saw at a market. I think it might have been Presidente or something. It was so massive, I just had to take a picture of it. So Maganas can get over 5 pounds in weight. I mean, really, really big. The problem with Magana, and it has its pluses because it fruits kind of early, as early as February sometimes. I would classify it more as a spring Mamey. But it has an issue with uneven ripening, unfortunately, and I don't grade it as one of the better tasting Mameys. So something to keep in mind about this variety, you should probably try it before planting it. But it is one of the more precocious Mamey trees there is. Magana trees usually start fruiting relatively quickly compared to like a Pantene. But it is available, very much so in the nursery trade. Next one is Pace. So this was a creation of Pablo Lara down in Homestead. It is a cross between the Tazumal and the Magana, which I just talked about. It does not have the uneven ripening issues that Magana has, and it is a better quality fruit in general. It has better flavor. Doesn't get that massive though. It is an oblong shaped Mamey. It's not round, but it is kind of a later spring Mamey. Maybe early summer, but mostly later spring. They're in season in like April and May. I've found that Pace trees are not that precocious, and so they can be a little frustrating the first however many years that once they start fruiting, because they don't seem to fruit very well, but the production does pick up as they get older. So this is certainly a Mamey that can require some patience. It is a fairly vigorous tree as well, much more vigorous than the aforementioned Magana. See, it's got kind of a salmon-colored flesh.
How would you rate it on flavor in terms of variety?
I would rate it above Pantene, and I would rate it certainly above Magana. So it's pretty good as far as Mameys go. I like a couple of the other ones I'm going to mention in a moment just a little better than Pace though. So, okay, Viejo. Viejo means old in Spanish. It's a very small tree by Mamey standards. So if you're a person that doesn't have a lot of yard space and you're terrified of this massive tree taking over your yard, but you still want to grow a Mamey, this is one to consider. Now the cool thing about this is, besides being a pretty small tree by Mamey standards, it's also a fairly precocious one. And its fruit is usually maturing in the winter months here when there's like hardly any Mamey or no Mamey to be found. That's pretty cool. It's an okay Mamey. I don't rate it too high in terms of flavor standards, but it doesn't usually have any problems ripening unevenly. I would imagine if this thing fruited like in the warmer months of the year that it could be sweeter, but it's perfectly fine and most people enjoy it quite a bit. They're small fruits. They're like the size of a baseball a lot of the time. So it's like one of the smallest Mameys that we grow. Not as impressive in terms of its size compared to some of the other varieties. But it does have a nice red flesh. And I'm always happy to be picking them in December, January, February when there's not too much else around at that point in time. So this is something you should write down, this name, if you're thinking about a Mamey, but you're concerned about space and size. All right, so the next few I'm going to talk about are some introductions that were brought from overseas. There was a gentleman that lived in the Yucatan. I'm not even sure if he's alive anymore. His name was Eduardo Marin, and he was kind of a collector of all things Mamey. Back in the 1970s, this man came to the attention of some folks in the Florida nursery trade, specifically the Zill family. And they decided to make a trip over to the Yucatan with our own Har Medin, and Har shared this story before, to go Mamey hunting, and sapodilla hunting and some other things too. And this man had amassed quite a nice collection for himself. Some of them were varieties he had selected. Some of them were, or a lot of them were just from trees that the locals had over there in Mexico. Anyway, this one here This beautiful fruit, I took this picture a couple months ago. Lorito was named after a man that Maureen knew. I don't know if it was in a nearby village or something. And Lorito means parrot in Spanish. This name came to be because the gentleman that he got it from had a tendency to talk a lot. And, so anyway, but it is an outrageously good Mamey. This is one of my favorite Mameys to eat. It is a very deep red color, very good texture, and nice size too. It's very much a summer fruit. So this is like peak of the summer Mamey. Produces well enough for us. I don't know if it's good enough production for commercial purposes, but certainly plenty enough for a backyard. So this is a great one to consider if you've got some space. I call it a moderately vigorous Mamey. It's not as aggressive as the Pace or the Pantene, but it's not as compact as the Viejo or the Magana or the Excalibur. So, but it is one of my favorites. Along with this next one, this was another Eduardo Marin selection, Cepeda Especial. Has a very red flesh, exceptional eating quality. I don't know, this might have been my favorite Mamey to eat this year. The tree has a moderate bearing habit. It's fruited for the last couple of years for us, and I would say a fairly vigorous tree, so this is one that you need a little space for sure. And it is a kind of a July-August Mamey, and I don't even sell these, by the way. I just share them with my family and my employees, and they enjoy them quite a bit. The one thing I will say about the Sapote, as good as it is, and it's better than Pantene, it's certainly better than Magana, it's better than Pace. It doesn't have as long of a shelf life as those do, so it needs to be consumed a little faster. So it does have that drawback. It goes soft very quick. It goes from being a hard fruit to being like super soft like overnight. But that's not a big deal for backyarders. That's more of a problem for commercial growers. So, maybe not the most commercially adaptable variety, but it is a great Mamey.
How big is it?
Decent size. I would say it's on the larger size. So medium to large size fruit. It is not small like a Viejo or something like that. All right. There's a lot of other varieties available in Florida. Some of them aren't good. In fact, I've tried some of the ones that aren't good. But these are ones that might show some promise. But they're not really propagated in the trade. And we're growing all of these. K40 is from Costa Rica. I forgot where Lobo is from. Pozo Azul means blue well. That's one that Julian Lara's been promoting as being quite good. And it's a very compact tree. So that's another reason why it's of interest. Buena Vista and Vidal Redondo are two other varieties we're growing that we have not fruited yet. So our goal in our program is that we want to evaluate Mameys and green Sapotes that don't have the attention of nurseries, that don't have the attention of fruit growers in general, but have really exceptional traits and are certainly worthy of propagation. So we've been evaluating our Mameys for some years now, and we're going to continue to do that in our program in the hopes of educating the public and maybe getting some of these more obscure varieties into the nursery trade and accessible to backyarders like yourselves. We do sell Mamey budwood and distribute Mamey budwood, and so that's given us an opportunity to get some of these varieties out there, but it's going to take time for us to evaluate them. All right, green Sapote. This is Mamey's very close cousin, much closer than the Canistel and the Aviu and the Camito. So close, in fact, that I've even had people incorrectly suggest to me that they were the same species. They are not. There are distinctions, to be sure, but they are similar. And if you like Mamey, but you've never had green Sapote, you're going to like green Sapote, guaranteed. Green Sapote is from a slightly different area than the Mamey. It's indigenous to the Central Highlands down in Central America, like in Guatemala. It's pretty common down there, for example. You don't really see it at lower elevations too much at all down there. Not that it can't be grown there, it can, but it just seems to like that higher ground. It does not like wet feet at all. It's even less tolerant of flooding than the Mamey, something to keep in mind about it. The foliage looks pretty similar on the green Sapote compared to the Mamey, except that it produces much smaller leaves than the Mamey, and it makes smaller internodes too, which is kind of interesting. The flowers look very similar, but the fruit is more of a round shape, and it's smaller. Like the biggest green Sapotes I've seen are like the size of a baseball. But don't let that discourage you. It is a absolutely delicious, delicious fruit. It tastes as good as basically the highest quality Mameys that you'll eat. There are some people that claim green Sapote has some other flavors to it that you won't find in Mamey. That might be true, but my palate's not sensitive enough to detect that sort of thing. But the interesting thing is it doesn't turn that gray, dull color that a Mamey does. Green Sapote kind of turns red as it starts to mature. It goes kind of a burnished orange, but it starts out green. I think that the name is a little bit of a misnomer given that this is the final color that it usually turns, but in I think Central America or parts of Central America they call it red Faison or something like that, so they don't know it as green Sapote, but its botanical name is Pauteria varieties, by the way. So here's what the leaves look like. See, this leaf in my thumb there is a Mamey. Look at how much bigger it is than the green Sapote leaves. Now the cool thing about the green Sapote is that the trees don't grow anywhere near as aggressively as Mameys, and I'll talk about that in a bit. But it hasn't been in Florida as long as Mamey has. I told you that Mameys got introduced in the 1800s. Green Sapote didn't show up until the 1950s or so, and it was only thanks to the efforts of Bill Whitman, who some of you might be familiar with, was a very famous plant explorer and one of the founders of the Rare Fruit Council down in Miami. So we can thank him for that as well. Anyway, he got a tree or scions from Central America, brought it to Florida, and he was the first person to grow it and the first person to fruit it. He fruited it at his estate over in Val Harbor, down near Miami. Later on, scions were taken from Mr. Whitman's tree and distributed, to nurseries. It was given to the University of Florida, and they have some specimens growing at the facility at Trek, very close to the offices at Trek. So even though it was introduced later than Mamey, it's been around here for 60 years, and yet it's kind of hard to find. You don't really see them in people's yards too often. They're not so easy to find in the nursery trade, although there are a few nurseries making them. But you would have expected something like this to have, caught on at least to some degree in popularity. Of course, the green Sapote is not found in Cuba, worth noting that. Not that it can't be grown there, but it's not indigenous there. So I would say that for a species as good as it tastes and promising as it is potentially, they're kind of underplanted. And there's some benefits to growing it over the Mamey. For one thing, green Sapote usually is maturing its fruit here in the winter when there's like no Mameys around other than the Viejo. That's pretty cool. And something I've really always enjoyed about the green Sapote is like you're getting it's like eating a Mamey in winter. They're also a lot smaller than most Mameys, nowhere near as aggressive as a Mamey Sapote. Very easy to keep their size in check, and that's wonderful if you're somebody who doesn't have the space for a really big Mamey tree. So they're great in that regard. I think they're better than a lot of Mameys. Like I'll take a green Sapote over a Pantene, or certainly over like a Magana. They're more comparable to like the higher quality Mameys in flavor to me. And to a lot of other people too. I think most people that try this fruit are really impressed with it, honestly. They also don't take as long for their fruit to be ready. So from the time that a green Sapote has set its little fruit until the time the fruit is mature, it's around a year or so. Nowhere near close to the 2 years that it can take a Mamey, or certain kinds of Mamey at least. And by the way, right here, this little tree is a green Sapote that was planted at the same point in time that Mamey over there in the background was planted. And you can see it's about half the size. So you can just imagine something like that growing like in a big container or something. That tree, I think, was planted in 2015. So that's like from the time it was grafted, that's like a 10-year-old green Sapote tree right there. All right, drawbacks. Well, they're not that precocious, unfortunately. I think a Viejo Mamey will probably fruit a little quicker than a green Sapote will. They are smaller than Mameys. They don't get as big. And they certainly don't like wet feet. So if your yard is really wet a lot, or you have a lot of low spots, standing water potentially in your yard, you should not think about growing this because it will die if it floods. Trust me, I've had green Sapote trees die before. And they can be a little challenging to find. Only a few nurseries make them. Lara Farms is the only one that regularly makes green Sapote trees, but there could be some others that are grafting them now as well. Yeah, they make it. But what I'm saying is a lot of the other nurseries don't. So Julian Lara is a champion of the Mamey and green Sapote, and he grafts a lot of varieties that other nurseries don't touch. Here's a picture of some of the developing fruit on the tree. This is what it looks like when it's small. So you see it is green for a while, and then it starts to mature, and near the end, like the last month or so, it turns that kind of orange color. All right, so I'll talk a little bit about green Sapote cultivars. The only one that's common, and it's not so common, but the one that's been grafted the most amongst the green Sapotes is the so-called Whitman cultivar. It's also been grafted under the name Trek because of the trees over at Trek. This is a ripe fruit from our Whitman tree, and kind of turns kind of a salmon color, I guess. They can get kind of red though, depending on the given year, I suppose. The seed is not very big, and if you're going to look for a green Sapote, this is probably the one that you're going to find and have to grow. But nothing wrong with it. It's an excellent variety. There are many more varieties of green Sapote found in other countries, or even in Hawaii. There's a lot of varieties of green Sapote available for, whatever reason it just didn't become so popular here. There is kind of a school of thought that thinks the green Sapote is more cold tolerant than the Mamey. I'm very, very skeptical that that's true based on, anecdotal evidence, I suppose, but they don't really see freezing temperatures in the parts of Central America that the green Sapote grows, even though it does grow at higher elevation. But anyway, Whitman has been brought to other places, but like in Australia and Hawaii, there's a lot more varieties of green Sapote.
What's the size of the fruit?
I'm sorry, what?
What's the size?
The fruit? It doesn't get any bigger than your fist, and really it's more like the size of a tennis ball. So, but they make enough fruit that it doesn't matter. Okay, Pomoho, this is a variety that apparently is from Hawaii, and yet nobody from Hawaii or in Hawaii has ever heard of it. So every time I've ever brought it up to their Department of Agriculture or whatever, they don't know what on earth I'm talking about, but there is a Pomoho research station in Hawaii that this would have come from. It was brought to Florida by Fairchild Botanical Garden. It is grafted by Julian Lara at Lara Farms. He told me, and it's been a couple years since I talked to him about this variety, now that I think about it, but it had not fruited for him, ever, like several years ago, and he had had it for a while. Well, ours is fruiting, finally, so we'll see what it tastes like. Apparently it's a round one. There can be oblong-shaped green Sapotes, by the way. Over in Hawaii, I've seen pictures of some of the oblong ones, but anyway, we're still evaluating this guy, and probably will be for a while, but this is the only other one that I know of that you can get in the Florida nursery trade, and you, as of right now, can only get it from Lara Farms. Two other varieties that I'm aware of that exist in Florida. One is Macawau, I think. I don't know how to pronounce that. It's from Hawaii too. They probably haven't heard of it there either. But Grande, that's one that is in Fairchild Botanical Gardens collection. I think both of these are. Fairchild doesn't really talk about their green Sapotes and Mameys too much, unfortunately, but they do have an impressive collection of some of that stuff. Maybe someday I'll get budwood from these and try them out. But anyway, so that covers these two species. I really like them. I think they should be grown a lot more often. They should be talked about more often. Most people that try Mamey or green Sapote really like them. And it's just a matter of awareness, really, and of course patience too. But what I'm hoping to impress upon you, if you're kind of on the fence about growing Mamey, is that you have options, and even if you are limited in space or time, there are choices that can help kind of accelerate the process or make it possible for you to grow one of these species in your own yard. So, and we're going to continue evaluating Mameys, for the years to come. I love doing it and sharing that information with everybody. We're going to hopefully graft some of these more obscure varieties and make them available to people, because we want people growing Gilberto Mamey or whatever and seeing how it does. It's the only way we learn about these things. So, and maybe someday even some of these will become commercially adapted, who knows. So anyway, with that, I'm going to open it up to questions. Sugar sand is over there, the pH is like 5.8 or something like that. But if your soil is more alkaline than that, there's things that you can do to try to reduce the pH of your soil. And it starts with actually applying organic matter and mulch and stuff like that. But if you want to get a little more aggressive, you can apply pelletized sulfur. Works pretty well at lowering pH. If you're having nutritional issues with your trees, independent of that, you can use chelated drenches to apply certain micronutrients that aren't available. Sorry, what?
Chelated what?
Drenches, like micronutrient drenches. So like what happens is, like, it's kind of complex chemistry, but like when the pH of the soil gets above a certain level, it becomes difficult for the tree to absorb nutrients that are actually present in the soil. So there could be like iron in your soil, but because the pH is like at 8 or something like that, the tree's not absorbing the iron. So, and you can keep giving it iron sulfate all you want, it's not going to absorb it. So what they have to do is they have to change the molecular structure of that iron ion so that it can be absorbed at that pH level. So they make products basically that if your pH is too elevated, you can still deliver those nutrients to the tree. And depending on your situation, you might be deficient in one or several of them. It's very common for multiple micronutrient deficiencies to occur at the same time. Like manganese and iron occur together all the time. Boron's a really common deficiency here. So if you can apply like these microelements that I'm discussing here to your Mameys almost preemptively, I think it helps a lot. So, I've seen like these sad cases where people planted Mamey trees and they struggled or they died back or whatever. And when I've planted Mamey trees myself, I've had issues where if we didn't take optimal nutritional care, we've had dieback, and I've even lost a couple trees from that. Now most of our Mameys are healthy now, but it's something to keep in mind if you're exploring or growing them. So, yeah.
So with that, what's your fertilization schedule? And also, I don't know if you had mentioned it, but do you take care of the green Sapote the same way?
Yeah, I should have discussed that part. The culture on green Sapote is pretty much the same as Mamey, other than that you got to make sure that it's growing like in a dry spot. But otherwise, fertilization, it's pretty much the same nutritionally speaking. They don't grow as quickly as Mameys do, so you're not having to feed them quite as much fertilizer. Like we have to give a good amount of fertilizer to our larger Mamey trees to keep them happy. If you follow the University of Florida's chart, it will give recommendations in terms of the amount of poundage of fertilizer you should be applying to the tree. And so we break it down into quarterly applications. So we're not applying fertilizer to our Mameys every single month, and our green Sapotes same way. We're doing it like in March, and then again in May, and then again in August, and so forth. So, that University of Florida chart, it'll tell you how many pounds you should not exceed during the year, and kind of gives you an average range of what you should be applying per application. And I highly recommend following that. We've had very good success following UF's fertilization program. I don't know if it has recommendations as far as drenching is concerned, but we do kind of preemptively drench our Mamey trees to help keep them happy, and we do apply foliar spray when we're spraying our mangoes and our sapodillas. So they're getting the same micronutrient spray to their leaves at the same time, and that can happen over the course of quite a few times during the year. And Mamey trees seem to respond pretty well to this nutritional program. Our Mameys are very happy. I see a lot of Mameys in the neighborhood, if you will, that aren't so happy. Like they grew, but they go through cycles where they're clearly micronutrient deficient and they get dieback, they don't fruit that well, whatever. So nutrition, really important with Mameys and green sapotes both. So, yeah.
Yeah, do you have recommendations for bringing down the height of like the 40?
Yeah, that's tough. If you're going to do a tree that size, I would actually hire an arborist. But in terms of recommendations, I've seen, I mean, like if you want to be real drastic, I've seen my Mamey trees get hat racked and they come back pretty aggressively. If you do something like that, and you want to bring it down a size, my suggestion is you bring it down to like a pretty low height. I mean, if the scaffold limbs aren't occurring too high up, if it's a grafted tree, that's usually not an issue, but if it's a seedling, it can be. But when it starts to come back is when you got to start shaping it again. So if you hat rack the tree, well, one, I would consider whitewashing the trunk. We do that with our mangoes too to prevent sunburn, because remember, that canopy has been shading out the bark. So you taking 40 feet of canopy off or whatever, you can get sunburn. But number two, when they start to shoot back, you kind of start to shape them. So like we'll say every 16 inches of growth or so, you can cut the terminal bud out to try to encourage it to grow a little more horizontally rather than lanky-like. And you'll get production back a little sooner. So we had a neighbor that had a big tall tree like that. It's probably close to 40 feet tall. It's probably 30-some feet tall, I guess. And they cut it back a number of years ago. And I think now that tree's starting to come back in production. But they took it down to about 10 or 12 feet, which is pretty drastic, right? I would suggest if you can maintain it at I don't know how tall you want to keep the tree, but if you can take off maybe a third of the canopy at once, certainly hopefully no more than 50%, there shouldn't be too much fruit production loss. You can take off the sides 1 year and then the top the next, or the other way around if you prefer. So those are some things that you can do to try to manage a really large tree like that. They can be kept happy and productive under 20 feet, or at least under 25 feet. They don't have to get big. So that's usually just because people let them get large. They do respond pretty well to pruning too. So.
How do green sapotes do with drought, and also can they handle a little bit of shade or do they need full sun?
How do they handle what?
Drought?
How do green sapotes handle drought? They handle it a little better than the Mameys do. I've definitely noticed that because I've had stretches of time where unfortunately our irrigation system wasn't functioning, and I always observe the drought stress in the Mameys before the green sapotes do. But I do think they definitely can feel drought stress, and they should receive some supplemental irrigation to prevent that. What was the second part of your question?
Do they need full sun, complete full sun, or can they handle a little bit of shade?
They can handle a little bit of shade. We have a green sapote that's actually growing in partial shade, but they're going to fruit better in full sun. So that's just what I've observed. The ones that I see growing in full sun just are more prolific in their flowering and in their fruit set. So if you can put them in a full sun spot, do it. If you have to go with shade, just don't expect as much production from them.
What do you do when it gets very cold season? What do you do for the Mameys?
I don't really have to do anything for them, fortunately, because where we're located, we don't get that cold. We're less than 2 miles from the ocean over there. Now, if there was a threat of freezing weather, then we would want to consider protecting them. And we haven't experienced that in the time that we've been at the farm. But they're going to benefit from getting covered by like a temporary structure or something like that if you do get freezing weather. You can build something like that out of PVC, and you just provide like a heat lamp or just a lamp to provide a little bit of extra heat to keep them from hitting that 32-degree and below temperature. But another thing you can do if there's a freeze approaching is you can water the hell out of them. I mean, really water them a lot. And this goes for your other fruit trees too, by the way. You can use overhead irrigation, but you probably don't have overhead sprinklers, and I've never seen that done with Mamey before. I've seen it done with mango and some other species. But like if the water is continuously hitting the tree, it will encase it in ice, and then it looks bizarre, but it actually works. At least I've seen it work on citrus and mango before. Maybe somebody will try that on a Mamey tree someday that they're trying to grow in Ocala or something. The good thing is that our winters have been so warm for the last 12 years or more that the threat of freezing weather, at least for us here in Palm Beach County, just seems to, not happen too often. So, but it is something you should be aware of because they don't, if they get a frost, they'll defoliate for sure, and it doesn't take too much lower than that for them to get dieback and get killed potentially. So, yes, in the black.
You didn't talk at all about the black sapotes?
That's because they're not related.
Oh, they're not?
Nope, they're closer related to a persimmon than they are to a Mamey, actually. So no relation at all. That's a totally made-up name. In fact, when I used to sell black sapote, I would call it chocolate persimmon because it sounded so much better than calling it black sapote. But yeah, that's why I didn't talk about it. It's not related. So.
Will you answer a question?
Sure.
Okay. How do I know when to pick them?
Oh, okay. Well, for one thing, they're going to start splattering on your ground. But what I remember about them, because I used to grow them, and I don't grow them anymore because I just didn't find them very valuable. But what I remember about them is that the top of the fruit would start to curl up, and if I picked a few of them and they ripened fine, usually the same was true for the rest of them. They would go from like a darker shade of green to kind of a lighter shade of green. Some of them actually turn almost yellowish, but it depends on the cultivar of black sapote. Anyway, it's a trial and error thing, but eventually you kind of figure out what the maturity window is for your variety, and they often have two crops anyway. They'll have like a summer crop and then a winter crop. So if the animals beat you out to one, there's like a second chance later in the year or whatever, but I just didn't find there was much demand for them. Their shelf life is terrible. They last like a few days before they got to be tossed. So, they're perfectly fine, yard tree. But just pick a few, and if they don't ripen, leave them alone for several weeks or a month or whatever, and then try again would be my suggestion. And look for that hue change in the color. Yeah.
That's a beautiful presentation. Do you have it available on your website or?
I don't have it on our website, but we have a PDF copy of it, which we're going to supply to the RFC, and then if you want it, they can give it to you. We don't care what you do with it, just don't try to edit it. But I guess you can share it with your friends and family, whatever, it's fine. Rob.
So Chris, real quick, to deal with the freezing and the cold, Chris Rollins recommended actually removing mulch away from the trees.
Yeah, that's important. You're right. I'm sorry. I should have mentioned that. So like I'm telling you to mulch your trees, but like if there is a freeze, pull the mulch away. The mulch trees are much more likely to get frost damage. It sounds weird and maybe doesn't seem like it makes sense, but I'm telling you in actual practice, that's how it works. So if a freeze is expected or possible within a few days or something like that, just pull the mulch away. You can push it right back over again, but the mulched ones do seem to get more freeze damage than the unmulched ones. So.
Any experience with
Didn't talk about Mamey.
Which one? Mamey apple, like Mamey Americana. Well, I don't grow it. I don't like it that much, but there's people that grow it, and if you want to buy a tree, Julian Lair grafts them. I don't have any experience growing it. I just never liked the fruit. So, but somebody else can comment more to it than I can. Okay, go ahead.
Experience with white sapote?
White sapote, also not related to Mamey. It's closer related to citrus. A very good fruit. I like it. Now, some people don't because they find it a little too bitter. But yes, I've grown a few varieties of white sapote over the years. Sapote is something that gets attached to a number of different species that are totally unrelated to one another. Okay, so, but and there's debate over, in botany over this kind of stuff. But white sapote, the one thing I will say about white sapote is that you got to make sure you've tried it and like it first. About 1 in 4 people or so that try white sapote taste this metallic bitterness to it, and then they just hate it. Otherwise, like, I enjoy it quite a bit, but I no longer grow it. I used to grow like 3 different varieties of it. The cool thing about it is it's relatively precocious. Doesn't take a real long time to get a grafted one to start fruiting. The insects like chewing on them quite a bit, though. I remember that about them. Other than that, I know a few varieties. Like I grew Subel, I grew Redland, which Redland I think did the best of the white sapotes that I grew. I grew another one called the Youngins, which was pretty good. It might have been the best tasting one that I had. Anyway, that's about all I had to say about white sapote. Yeah.
Any experience with the pumpkin pie variety of Mamey?
Pumpkin pie was a variety that Gary Zill brought back from Costa Rica. I planted one that was decent size, and it died. And I haven't planted one since. And then, I kind of thought, well, I just screwed up because I didn't give it enough nutritional care or whatever. And then other people that grew it told me theirs died too. So I don't know. I haven't tried it. Gary told me that it was outstanding, and if Gary likes it, Gary's got a very, very strict palate, and he's not one to give something undue praise. So I would say it probably tastes amazing, but I haven't had it. I will try growing it again at some point. I just gotta graft another one or get one from Gary or whatever. But it's interesting. It does have kind of a more compact growth habit. So I mentioned that there's some Mameys that are kind of compact. That's one of them. It definitely had shorter internodes compared to some of the other Mameys that we grow. It's more comparable to like the Excalibur Mamey, or Pozo Azul, which Julian grows. That's also a very compact tree for us and for him too, I think. So it's got that going for it, but I need a chance to evaluate it, and there's just not enough of them out in the wild. The Zill nursery is the only nursery that's grafted it as far as I'm aware of on any kind of scale. So because one nursery makes something, that usually means that there's just not many of them out there available, whereas some of these other varieties I've discussed are much more commonly available because there's several nurseries grafting them. So we'll see about pumpkin pie in a few years. Mark.
I bought a green sapote about a decade ago. So about 90% chance to live in.
Repeated what?
He said that he bought a green sapote about a decade ago or so, and asking if it was a Whitman. 99% chance it's a Whitman. Nothing wrong with Whitman either, by the way. Whitman is a really good fruit. So anyway, one thing I didn't mention in the presentation that I just thought about, there can be self-incompatibility with Mameys and possibly green sapotes as well. And this is not something that's well studied, but they will probably fruit better if there's another variety of Mamey nearby. So just be aware of that. I should have talked about that one. Robert.
Do you know, are the ones that Julian has, like along his fence there, mostly Whitmans?
The green sapotes?
Yeah.
I believe so. In fact, he didn't plant his Pomomoho for a really long time. He had it growing in a pot. Yeah.
What was the question?
He was at, I'm sorry, yeah. He asked if the green sapotes that are growing along the perimeter fence at Julian Lara's nursery are Whitmans. And from what I remember, they are. But the only other one he makes is Pomomoho, and I don't think he makes anywhere near as many of those as he does Whitmans. So I'm pretty sure they're Whitman. Mark.
You said another variety or a tree?
Another variety. Yeah, I mean, like if you have two Magana self-pollinates anyway, but like if you had two of the same variety sitting next to each other, and it's not a variety that self-pollinates well, then having two of them next to one another isn't going to do anything for you. We do, huh?
Is peace self-pollinated?
I'm skeptical about it, actually. I'm not sure. It may not. But I can tell you this, the way we planted our Mameys is we planted them in groups together. We did not isolate, a single variety because we're still learning about whether they're, self-pollinating or not. And we wanted to evaluate the fruit first and foremost. So it's not something where I can give you a firm chart and say for sure. I'm pretty confident Magana self-pollinates. I know Pantene self-pollinates. And I believe, no, I not believe, I know Viejo self-pollinates too. So.
Can they cross-pollinate with these?
Probably not. They are different species, despite what some people might tell you. But I won't rule it out completely. But that's anything like that in terms of trying to hybridize green Sapote and Mamey is purely speculative. I don't know of any experiments that have tried that. So I won't say no for sure. I don't know enough about the genetics behind them to say if it's possible or not. All right. Any other questions? Yeah.
Due to this, I've seen Mamey spelled E-Y and also K-E. Is that the same plant or just?
Depends on the context, but it could be. There's been like different botanical names for Mamey actually in the past. Usually Mamey Americana gets spelled the other way. I've noticed that.
Julia did write that on the.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, that's usually the context that I see that. Otherwise, when I'm referring to Mamey Sapote or see it in published materials, it's usually spelled E-Y.
Okay.
So. Okay, any other questions? Any non-Mamey questions? Anything? Nope. Great. Okay, well, that's it. Thank you so much.